What was supposed to be a polite lunch turned into the unraveling of carefully buried secrets. The moment a stranger called my mother-in-law's name across the restaurant, the mask she had worn for years began to crack. That afternoon at 2:30 p.m., in a crowded Portland bistro, I watched her perfectly composed face shatter like fine china hitting marble. The woman who had tormented me with her subtle cruelties was about to learn that some ghosts refuse to stay buried, and that day became the stage for the revenge I never knew I'd been preparing for. My name is Claire Matthews, and I've been a nurse at St. Alden Memorial for 12 years. I've held the hands of dying patients, delivered devastating news to families, and worked 36-hour shifts that left me feeling like a ghost wandering the fluorescent-lit corridors. But nothing in my medical training prepared me for the psychological warfare that comes with having Margaret Hale as a mother-in-law. The text came at 6:45 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, just as I was getting ready for my shift. Margaret never texted she considered it beneath her, so seeing her name on my phone screen made my stomach clench. "Darling, I've made us a reservation at Cascadia for lunch tomorrow. Noon sharp. We need to catch up." There was no question mark. With Margaret, there never was. I stared at the message while my coffee grew cold. Cascadia was Portland's newest trendy restaurant, the kind of place where they served deconstructed salads on slate plates and charged $60 for the privilege. Margaret loved these places not for the food, but for the audience. She performed better with witnesses. My husband Daniel was already at his law firm, had been since 5:30 a.m. He'd grown up learning to navigate around his mother's demands like a ship avoiding icebergs, but I'd never developed that skill. Maybe because I'd grown up in a double-wide trailer in eastern Oregon, where people said what they meant and passive aggression was a luxury we couldn't afford. "Can't make it," I typed back. "Working." Her response was immediate. "I've already spoken to your supervisor. She's approved your extended lunch break. How wonderful that St. Alden values family time." My hands shook slightly. Of course she had. Margaret had donated enough money to the hospital to have a wing named after her late husband. My supervisor probably tripped over herself to accommodate the request. I knew what this was about. Last week at her book club, which she'd insisted I attend, I'd committed the unforgivable sin of disagreeing with her interpretation of the novel. In front of her friends, her smile had remained perfect, but her eyes had promised retribution. Looking forward to it. I lied. The next morning, I spent an extra 10 minutes in front of my closet, hating myself for caring. Margaret would find fault regardless. My clothes were either trying too hard or not trying hard enough. I settled on a simple navy dress that Daniel had bought me for my birthday, hoping she wouldn't criticize something her son had chosen. At 11:45 a.m., I told my colleague Sarah I was leaving for lunch. "The Dragon Lady summoned you," she asked, not looking up from a patient chart. "How did you—" "Honey, everyone knows. She name-dropped you 3 times when she called. Made sure we all knew you were her daughter-in-law." Sarah finally looked up, sympathy clear in her eyes. "Good luck." The drive to Cascadia took 15 minutes, but I stretched it to 20, sitting in my car in the parking garage for an extra 5 minutes, breathing deeply. I thought about the meditation app on my phone, the one I'd downloaded after the last family dinner when Margaret had spent 2 hours explaining how a girl like me could better myself with the right guidance. At 12:01 p.m., I walked into Cascadia. Margaret would already be there, seated at the best table, making sure everyone saw her waiting for her perpetually disappointing daughter-in-law, who couldn't even be punctual. I was right. She sat by the window, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, wearing a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. She was studying the menu with the intensity of a scholar examining ancient texts, but I knew she'd already decided what we were both ordering. "Claire," she said without looking up, "you're late." "By 1 minute?" Punctuality is a form of respect. She finally raised her eyes, scanning my appearance with the efficiency of a TSA agent. "That dress is nice, a bit casual for Cascadia, but I suppose it'll do." I sat down, noticing how she'd positioned herself so the light hit her jewelry just right, sending little rainbows across the white tablecloth. Everything with Margaret was calculated, choreographed. "Huh, thank you for arranging my time off," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Of course, darling. I know how busy you are with your little job." Little job. I'd saved 3 lives last month. But to Margaret, anything that didn't involve stock portfolios or charity galas was little. She signaled the waiter with the kind of imperious gesture that made me understand why the French Revolution happened. As he approached, I noticed her glancing toward the door, a quick, almost nervous movement that seemed out of character. "We'll start with the oysters," she announced, "and 2 glasses of the Sancerre." "I don't like oysters," I said quietly. "Nonsense. You just haven't had good ones." She smiled at the waiter. She's from Eastern Oregon, still developing her palate. The waiter's expression remained professionally blank, but I felt my cheeks burn. Margaret had a gift for making me feel like a child who'd tracked mud onto her Persian rugs. As the waiter left, she launched into her usual performance loud enough for neighboring tables to hear about her recent donation to the symphony, her upcoming charity gala, the vacation home in Aspen that simply needed renovating. But something was different today. Her timing was off, her gestures slightly too animated, and she kept looking at that door. "Are you expecting someone?" I asked. "What, no? Of course not." But her fingers drummed against the table, her massive diamond wedding ring clicking against the surface like a telegraph sending out an SOS. Something was coming. I could feel it the way I could sense when a patient was about to code a shift in the atmosphere, a wrongness in the rhythm of things. Margaret Hale, the woman who never showed weakness, who ruled her world with an iron fist wrapped in Hermes silk, was nervous, and that terrified me more than her usual cruelty ever could. The oysters arrived on a bed of crushed ice, arranged like pale, glistening accusations on the silver platter. Margaret picked up her tiny fork with the precision of a surgeon selecting a scalpel. "You know, Claire," she began, loud enough for the couple at the next table to pause their conversation. "I was just telling the ladies at the club about Daniel's promotion. Senior partner at 37 Remarkable. Isn't it?" "It is." I agreed, genuinely proud of my husband. "Of course. The Richardson boy made partner at 35. But then again, he married the Blackwood heiress. She hosts the most extraordinary dinner parties. Speaks 4 languages. Margaret slurped an oyster delicately, somehow making even that look regal. A real asset to his career. There it was, the first cut. I forced myself to swallow an oyster, fighting my gag reflex as the cold, briny mass slid down my throat. "I suppose we all contribute in our own ways," she continued, dabbing her lips with the linen napkin. "Though I do worry about Daniel. The partners' wives have certain expectations. The autumn gala is coming up, and I heard Julia Richardson is wearing Valentino." "I'm sure I'll find something appropriate." "Oh, darling, I wasn't suggesting." She paused, her hand frozen midair as she reached for another oyster. Her eyes had caught something behind me, toward the entrance. "I mean, of course you will, though perhaps we should go shopping together. I know the most wonderful boutique. The owner is a personal friend." The waiter returned to clear our appetizer plates. Margaret ordered for both of us the salmon for her, the duck for me, though I'd been eyeing the vegetarian risotto. "I don't eat duck," I said after the waiter left. "Since when?" "Since always." "Don't be dramatic, Claire. You had it at the Pemberton wedding. That was Daniel. I had the fish." She waved dismissively, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "Well, you should try new things, expand your horizons. That's what I've been trying to tell you. You could be so much more if you just applied yourself." A couple was seated at the table beside us, a man in an expensive suit and a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. Margaret immediately shifted in her chair, angling herself so they could better admire her Chanel bag. "Did I mention I'm chairing the hospital's new fundraising committee?" she said, her volume increasing another notch. We're planning to raise $10 million for the new cardiac wing. Of course, it's such a responsibility, but when you have the connections..." She was in full performance mode now, her hands moving expressively as she detailed her charitable works, her voice carrying across the restaurant like she was on stage. The woman at the next table glanced over, and Margaret preened. "It's so important to give back," Margaret continued. "I always tell Daniel that privilege comes with responsibility. That's why I worry about, well, some people just aren't raised with that understanding." "My mother worked 2 jobs to support us," I said quietly. "I'd say she understood responsibility pretty well." Margaret's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "Of course, darling. I didn't mean, oh, you're so sensitive. I was speaking generally." Our entrees arrived. The duck sat before me, its skin glistening with some kind of reduction, looking like something from a crime scene. Margaret had already started on her salmon, cutting it into precise, tiny pieces. "You know," she said between bites, "I've been thinking about your career situation." "My career situation?" "Well, you've been at St. Alden for what, 10 years? 12? "Right. And still just a floor nurse. I'm a charge nurse. I run the entire ICU night shift." "Yes, but surely you should be thinking bigger." "Administration. Perhaps. Or you could leave altogether. Daniel makes more than enough. You could focus on other things. Other things like hosting dinner parties and speaking 4 languages." Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. "There's no need for that tone." The restaurant bustled around us, the lunch crowd filling every table. But Margaret had created our own little bubble of tension. She kept glancing toward the door, then at her phone, which she'd placed face up beside her plate, another violation of her own etiquette rules. "Are you feeling all right?" I asked. "You seem distracted." "I'm perfectly fine." But she picked up her wine glass too quickly, and a drop of Sancerre splashed onto her cream suit. I watched in amazement as she actually cursed under her breath. Margaret, who once gave a 30-minute lecture about appropriate language when I said "damn" at Thanksgiving. She dabbed at the spot frantically with her napkin, her movements sharp and agitated. The couple at the next table was openly staring now, but not with the admiration she usually courted. "Let me get some club soda," I offered, starting to stand. "Sit down," she hissed. "Don't make a scene." I sat, watching as she tried to compose herself, but her mask was slipping. Her perfectly applied lipstick had smeared slightly at the corner. A strand of silver hair had escaped from her chignon. She looked almost human. "You know what your problem is, Claire," she said suddenly, her voice lower now, meant just for me. "You don't understand the game. You think your little job, your little life, means something. But in my world and Daniel's world, it's all about perception, about being the right kind of person. And I'm not the right kind of person. You could be, if you'd just listen to me, if you'd stop being so stubborn, so proud of where you came from." "I am proud of where I came from." She laughed, but there was something bitter in it. Pride. Such a dangerous thing. I used to be proud too, you know, proud of the wrong things. It took me years to learn better. It was the most honest thing she'd ever said to me, and for a moment, I saw something in her eyes, fear, regret. But then she glanced at the door again, and her whole body went rigid. "Margaret." She didn't answer. Her face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied foundation. Her hand trembled as she reached for her wine glass. And this time, she knocked it over entirely. The pale gold liquid spread across the white tablecloth like a prophecy written in wine. "I need to," she started, half rising from her chair. But it was too late. A voice, rough and carrying, cut through the restaurant's polite hum like a rusty blade through silk. "Maggie Hale well, I'll be damned." Margaret froze, still half standing, her face a mask of terror I'd never seen before. Every head in the restaurant turned toward the source of that voice, a man at a table by the bar, unkempt in a way that suggested hard living rather than mere carelessness. And in that moment, watching my composed, controlling, perfectionist mother-in-law stand there like a deer in headlights, I knew that everything was about to change. Time seemed to stretch like pulled taffy. The man stood up from his table, and I could see him clearly now, probably in his 60s, wearing a faded denim jacket over a plaid shirt that had seen better days. His face was weathered, deeply lined, with the kind of tan that came from outdoor work, not vacation beaches, but his eyes were sharp, focused, and locked onto Margaret with the intensity of a predator who'd just spotted prey. "Maggie Hale," he repeated louder this time, starting to walk toward us. I can't believe it. After all these years, Margaret's fingers gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles went white. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The entire restaurant had gone quiet. That terrible silence where you could hear the soft jazz playing from the speakers, the clink of a fork being set down, someone's nervous cough. "I'm sorry," Margaret said, her voice barely a whisper, then stronger, forced. "You must be mistaken." The man laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Mistaken. Come on, Maggie. You might have fancy clothes now, and that hair's gone silver. But I'd know you anywhere. We worked together for 5 years in Chicago. Brennan Foundation. Remember, Chicago. Margaret had always said she'd lived in Boston before moving to Portland. In all the family stories, all the carefully curated photo albums she'd shown me, there had never been any mention of Chicago." "Sir, you're confused," Margaret said, trying to summon her usual imperious tone, but her voice cracked. "My name is Margaret. Margaret Hale. I've never—" "Margaret now. Is it—" The man was at our table now, close enough that I could smell stale cigarettes and coffee on him. "You were Maggie back then. Maggie Turner. Remember, you were the one who always said we deserved more, that the rich folks we were helping wouldn't miss a few thousand here and there." The couple at the next table wasn't even pretending not to stare anymore. The woman had her phone out, held low but angled toward us. 2 tables over, a businessman had stopped mid-bite, pasta dangling from his fork. "Please," Margaret said, and I'd never heard her say that word with genuine emotion before. "You're making a scene. You're confused." "Confused." The man's voice rose. "I'm not the one who disappeared in the middle of the night when the auditors showed up. Left the rest of us to answer questions while you vanished with what was it? 300 grand. 4. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Margaret's perfect world, her carefully constructed image, was crumbling in real time, and I couldn't look away. "I need to leave," Margaret said, grabbing her purse with shaking hands. "This man is clearly unwell." But the stranger blocked her path. Not aggressively, just standing there, solid and immovable. "You know what happened to Eddie. Maggie. After you ran, they pinned it all on him. He did 2 years in federal prison, lost his house. His wife left him. Drank himself to death 5 years later." Margaret made a sound, not quite a gasp, not quite a sob. Her face had gone from pale to gray. "And Sandra. Remember Sandra. She was your friend. You got her involved, promised her it was just temporary. Just until her kids' medical bills were paid. She lost her nursing license. Never worked in healthcare again." Nursing license. I felt the words hit me like a physical blow. Margaret had been a nurse. She'd always acted like my profession was beneath her. Something quaint and working class. "I don't know any Sandra," Margaret whispered, but tears were forming in her eyes, smearing her mascara. "Sure you don't." The man pulled out his phone, swiped through it. "Funny thing about the internet, Maggie. Old newspaper articles never really disappear." He held up his screen, and though I couldn't see it clearly from where I sat, I could see Margaret flinch. "Look familiar. Charity fraud investigation 3 arrested, primary suspect still at large. That's you they're talking about, though you had brown hair then." The waiter approached nervously. "Is everything all right here? Should I call—" "Yes," Margaret said quickly. "Call security. This man is harassing us." The stranger laughed again. "Security. Sure, call them. Call the cops, too. I'm sure they'd be interested to know that Maggie Turner is living it up in Portland as Margaret Hale. Margaret's legs seemed to give out, and she sank back into her chair. The wine stain on the tablecloth had spread, reaching her plate, seeping into the white linen like blood through bandages. Her carefully styled hair was coming undone, silver strands falling around her face. "What do you want?" she asked, so quietly I almost didn't hear her. "Want nothing. I'm not here for you. Maggie. Pure coincidence. I'm visiting my daughter, she just had a baby. Came here because she said it was the best lunch spot in Portland." He shook his head. 22 years, and here you are, living the high life while Eddie's in the ground. I never meant... Save it. He put his phone away. I'm not gonna call anyone. What's the point? Eddie's dead. Sandra moved back to Mexico. The foundation closed down. Nothing's gonna bring any of that back. He turned to leave, then paused, looking back at Margaret or Maggie, or whoever she really was. You know what the funny thing is? You were good at that job. Really good. You actually cared about those families we were helping. Or at least I thought you did. Guess you cared more about helping yourself. He walked away, back to his table, leaving Margaret sitting there in ruins. The restaurant slowly came back to life. Conversations resumed in hushed tones. Silverware began clinking again, but everyone kept shooting glances our way. Margaret's hands shook as she tried to pick up her napkin. It fluttered to the floor. When she bent to retrieve it, I saw something I'd never seen before. Margaret Hale, the woman who terrorized waitstaff and made grown men nervous, was crying. "We need to go," she said, not looking at me. "Margaret." Now. She stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her chair. "The check." "I'll handle it," I said. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time since I'd known her, there was no judgment in her eyes, just fear. Raw, desperate fear. "Daniel can't know," she whispered. "Please, whatever happens, Daniel can't know." She walked out of the restaurant, not with her usual regal bearing, but quickly, almost stumbling, leaving behind her silk scarf on the chair, her dignity on the floor, and me sitting there with a table full of barely touched food and a head full of questions. The waiter appeared with the check, $437 for a lunch that had destroyed my mother-in-law's life. I handed him my credit card, my mind racing. Maggie Turner, Brennan Foundation, $300,000, federal prison, a dead man named Eddie. I looked at the door Margaret had fled through, then at the stranger who was calmly finishing his meal at the bar, acting as if he hadn't just detonated a bomb in the middle of Cascadia. My phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. "How's lunch with Mom going?" I stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed back, "Interesting." Because that was the understatement of the century. My mother-in-law, the woman who'd spent years making me feel small for my background, was a fraud, a thief, a runaway who'd built her entire perfect life on a foundation of other people's ruins. And now I knew her secret. The stranger was still there, finishing his coffee. I found myself walking toward him before I'd even decided to do it. He looked up as I approached, his weathered face showing no surprise. "You're the daughter-in-law," he said. It wasn't a question. "Claire," I said, sitting down uninvited. "Tom Garrison." He extended a calloused hand, and I shook it. "Sorry about the scene. Didn't mean to ruin your lunch." "You didn't ruin anything," I said. "Tell me about Chicago." He studied me for a moment, then signaled the waiter for another coffee. "You really don't know? She told us she lived in Boston before Portland, met her late husband at a charity event. Very romantic, very proper." Tom snorted. "Boston." "Right. Maggie Turner was from Southside Chicago. Grew up rough, like the rest of us. Started as a receptionist at the Brennan Foundation when she was 22. Worked her way up to office manager." The waiter brought 2 coffees. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, processing this new image of Margaret. The Brennan Foundation helped low-income families with medical expenses. Tom continued. Cancer treatments, surgeries, medications people couldn't afford. We processed millions in donations every year. Maggie Margaret, she was brilliant with the books, had this way of making numbers dance. What happened? What always happens when someone thinks they're smarter than everyone else? He sipped his coffee. Started small. 1,000 here, 2,000 there. Fake invoices, phantom vendors. She'd approve them, process them, pocket the money. But that wasn't enough. My phone buzzed another text from Daniel. I ignored it. She got Sandra involved. Sandra was in accounting. And Eddie. He was the foundation director, but he was old, trusting. Signed whatever Maggie put in front of him. Tom's face darkened. By the time someone noticed discrepancies, she'd taken at least $300,000, maybe more. The audit was scheduled for a Monday. By Friday night, Maggie Turner had vanished. And she left them to take the blame. Every bit of it. The paper trail led to Eddie's signatures, Sandra's computer login. They arrested both of them at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. I'll never forget Sandra's kids crying as they put her in the patrol car. The restaurant noise faded around us. All I could hear was Tom's gravelly voice painting a picture of a woman I didn't recognize. Eddie insisted Maggie was the mastermind, but she was gone. No forwarding address, no family to track down. Like she never existed. He pulled out his phone, showed me an old newspaper photo. That's her. The woman in the grainy photo was younger, with dark brown hair and a harder face, but it was unmistakably Margaret. She stood with a group of people at what looked like a fundraising event, smiling broadly. That's Eddie on her left. Tom pointed. Dead now. And Sandra on the right. Last I heard she was cleaning offices in Tijuana. How did she become Margaret Hale? Your guess is as good as mine. New identity, new hair color, new life, married rich, I see. Quite the transformation. I thought about Margaret's perfect life, the charity boards, the country club membership, the wing at the hospital with her husband's name, all built on stolen money meant for dying people. Are you going to report her? Tom was quiet for a moment. I've thought about it for the past 2 hours, ever since I saw her. Part of me wants to. For Eddie. For Sandra. He shook his head. But what's the point? Statute of limitations has probably run out, and even if it hasn't, Eddie's still dead. Sandra's kids are grown now. It won't change anything. But she destroyed lives. Yes, she did. He looked at me intently. Question is, what are you going to do with this information? I didn't answer because I didn't know. My phone rang Daniel calling now. I sent it to voicemail. Tom stood, pulled out his wallet. My daughter's expecting me. New grandson to meet. He put a 20 on the table. You know, I worked with Maggie for 5 years. She could be cruel, manipulative, absolutely ruthless when she wanted something, but she was also smart as hell. Whatever she's built here, whatever life she's created, it's probably as carefully constructed as those fake invoices. You're saying I should be careful? I'm saying a woman who can disappear completely and reinvent herself as someone else entirely is not someone to underestimate. He pulled on his jacket. She destroy your life yet. She's been trying for 7 years. Then maybe it's time someone returned the favor. He handed me a business card. That's my daughter's number. I'm staying with her for 2 weeks, in case you need someone to verify this story. After he left, I sat there for another 20 minutes, staring at the photo on his phone that he'd texted to me. Maggie Turner, age 35, smiling at a charity gala for sick children 3 months before she stole their money and ran. My phone had 6 missed calls from Daniel, 3 from Margaret. I finally listened to Daniel's voicemail. Mom called, crying, said something happened at lunch but won't tell me what. She's locked herself in her bedroom. What's going on? I called him back. I'm on my way home. Don't go to your mother's yet. Claire, what happened? I'll explain everything tonight. But would I? Would I tell him his mother was a fraud, that his entire childhood of private schools and country clubs had been funded by money stolen from cancer patients, that the woman who criticized me for using the wrong fork had once been Maggie Turner from Southside Chicago? I drove home at 2:15 p.m., my mind churning. In my apartment, I opened my laptop and started searching. Brennan Foundation Chicago scandal, Maggie Turner embezzlement, Eddie Morrison Federal Prison. The articles were all there, buried in newspaper archives and old crime reports. 3 people arrested in a charity fraud scheme. $347,000 missing. 1 suspect still at large, Margaret Maggie Turner, described as a 35-year-old office manager with brown hair and green eyes, approximately 5'6", considered intelligent and manipulative. There was another photo, an employee ID badge. Definitely Margaret, young and hungry-looking, with a hard smile that I recognized from every family dinner where she'd dissected my shortcomings. I found Eddie Morrison's obituary from 5 years ago. Died at home after a long illness, which I knew meant he drank himself to death. Survived by a sister in Nebraska. No mention of the foundation or the prison time. Sandra Delgado was harder to find, but I eventually tracked down a Phoenix newspaper article from 15 years ago about former healthcare workers struggling to find employment after criminal convictions. Her quote, "One mistake, trusting the wrong person, and your whole life disappears." One mistake, trusting Maggie Turner. I printed everything: articles, photos, court documents. The stat grew thicker as the afternoon wore on. By 5:30 p.m., I had a file that could destroy Margaret Hale's carefully constructed existence. The question was, what would I do with it? My phone rang. Margaret. I almost didn't answer. Then curiosity won. Hello. Claire. Her voice was different, smaller, older. I need to know what you're going to do. I don't know what you mean. Please don't play games. That man Tom, he told you everything, didn't he? He told me about Maggie Turner. A long silence. Then, that person doesn't exist anymore. Tell that to Eddie Morrison's family. Another silence. When she spoke again, her voice was harder, more like the Margaret I knew. What do you want money a divorce from Daniel? What? I want to know how you live with yourself. She laughed, bitter and sharp. The same way everyone does. One day at a time. Telling yourself you had no choice. You had choices. You chose to steal. You chose to run. You chose to let innocent people go to prison. Innocent Eddie was skimming too, just smaller amounts. And Sandra, she knew exactly what she was doing. So that makes it okay? No, it makes it complicated. She paused. Are you recording this? No. I could deny everything. Tom Garrison is obviously unwell. No proof I'm this Maggie person. Except for the photos, the articles, the fingerprints you probably left somewhere. Silence stretched between us. Finally, she said, the gala is next week. What? My charity gala. The one I've been planning for 18 months. 500 guests. $2 million expected in donations for the Children's Hospital. Her voice was steady now, controlled. Whatever you're planning. Please wait until after the gala. The audacity of it took my breath away. But then I thought about it. Really, thought about it. Fine, I said. After the gala. Thank you. I hung up without saying goodbye. Outside my window, Portland was getting ready for evening, lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. Margaret thought I'd given her a reprieve. What I'd really given her was enough rope to hang herself. Because Tom was wrong about one thing, this could change everything. And Margaret had just told me exactly when and where to do it. At her precious gala, in front of 500 of Portland's elite, with $2 million in charitable donations on the line. The woman who'd stolen from sick children was about to have her mask ripped off at a charity event for sick children. There was a poetic justice to it that even Maggie Turner from Southside Chicago would have to appreciate. The next 3 days became my secret investigation. I called in sick to work the first time in 5 years and turned my living room into a makeshift detective agency. Daniel was working late on a merger, which gave me the freedom to dig without questions. I started with the Brennan Foundation. The charity had closed in 2003, a year after the scandal. But the internet never forgets. Through archived websites, I found donor lists, event photos, and annual reports. Margaret Maggie appeared in dozens of pictures, always smiling, always positioned near the money and power. On Tuesday night at 11:45 p.m., while Daniel slept, I contacted my friend Marcus, a lawyer who specialized in white-collar crime. Hypothetically, I said, if someone committed embezzlement 22 years ago and disappeared, what would happen if they were discovered now? Depends on the state and the amount. Federal charges for embezzlement have a 5-year statute of limitations. Unless the person fled the state to avoid prosecution, then it could be extended. And if they created a false identity, that's identity fraud. No statute of limitations on that if it involved federal documents like a Social Security card. I felt my pulse quicken. What about the victims? Could they sue? Civil cases have different limitations, but after 20 years? He paused. Claire, is this about a patient? Something like that. After we hung up, I searched for Margaret Hale Portland Society and found hundreds of hits. She'd been busy building her reputation, hospital boards, museum committees, arts foundations. Every article mentioned her generous donations, her tireless work for charity. But where had the initial money come from? Her late husband, Robert Hale, had been wealthy, but not extraordinarily so. I found their wedding announcement from 2004, just 1 year after Maggie Turner disappeared. The timeline was too convenient. Wednesday afternoon at 2:30 p.m., I drove to the Portland Public Library and accessed their newspaper archives. Robert Hale's obituary from 5 years ago listed his assets successful but modest. A few million, not the tens of millions Margaret seemed to have access to. Then I found a small notice in the business section from 2004. Robert Hale had received a significant investment from a private partner to expand his real estate business. The partner was listed as M. Turner Investments. She'd used the stolen money to buy her way into Robert's life and business. That evening, I visited Tom Garrison at his daughter's house in Beaverton. His daughter, Jennifer, was feeding the baby when I arrived. "You're the woman Dad mentioned," she said, studying me. "The one asking about that old co-worker. I need more information about the money that was stolen." Tom appeared in the doorway. "Found something. She invested it in her husband's business, used it to build everything she has now." He whistled low. "Smart, laundering it through legitimate business. I need documents, proof. Most of the foundation's records were destroyed when they closed." He thought for a moment, but Sandra might have kept something. She was always paranoid about documentation, kept copies of everything. Where is Sandra now? Last I heard, she was in Los Angeles. Her daughter posts on Facebook sometimes. He pulled out his phone, searched for a few minutes. "Here, Maria Delgado. Looks like she's a teacher now." I messaged Maria that night, explaining who I was and what I needed. She responded at 7:20 a.m. The next morning. "My mother has been waiting 20 years for someone to believe her. She kept everything." Thursday afternoon, I drove to Los Angeles, a 12-hour round trip. Sandra Delgado lived in a small apartment in Koreatown, a far cry from the suburban house she'd lost after her conviction. She was smaller than I'd expected, with gray threading through her black hair and tired eyes that lit up when I explained why I was there. "Maggie Turner," she said, the name bitter on her tongue. I knew she was out there somewhere, living the life she stole. Sandra had boxes of documents, copied invoices, forged signatures, bank records she'd managed to duplicate before her arrest. Most damning were the emails between her and Maggie, where Maggie explicitly outlined the scheme. She was so confident, Sandra said, pointing to one email. Said rich people wouldn't miss the money, that we deserved it more than they did. Why didn't these emails save you during the trial? They mysteriously disappeared from the foundation's server. My copies were deemed inadmissible. They said I could have fabricated them. Her voice was bitter. My lawyer was a public defender with 40 other cases. He barely tried. I photographed everything, then scanned the most important documents using an app on my phone. Sandra watched me work, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time in years. Will this help? Yes, I said. She's about to host a charity gala for sick children. Sandra laughed, actually laughed. Of course she is. Maggie always did have a twisted sense of humor. As I prepared to leave, she grabbed my arm. I lost everything because of her. My career, my home, my reputation. My kids grew up with a mother who was a convicted felon. Whatever you're planning, make it hurt. The drive back to Portland gave me 6 hours to think. By the time I reached the city limits at 1:15 a.m., my plan was formed. Friday morning, I contacted a journalist friend, Bethany Chin, no relation despite the shared first name. She worked for the Oregonian and specialized in investigative pieces about financial crimes. I have a story for you, I said, but it has to run next Saturday. That's the night of the Hale Foundation Gala. Margaret Hale's big event. Exactly. We met at a coffee shop in the Pearl District. I showed her everything, the articles about Maggie Turner, the foundation scandal, Sandra's documents, the money trail leading to Robert Hale's business. Bethany's eyes widened as she read. This is huge. Margaret Hale is Portland royalty. She's also a thief who destroyed lives and built her fortune on stolen money meant for dying children. Can you get me an on-record source? Sandra Delgado will talk. So will Tom Garrison. And I have all the documentation. She was already typing notes into her phone. I'll need to verify everything independently, but if this checks out. She looked up at me. This will be front page, maybe even picked up nationally. Good. Why next Saturday specifically? Because she'll be on stage, in front of everyone who matters to her, asking for money for charity. I smiled coldly, and I want to see her face when she realizes everyone knows exactly who she really is. That night, Daniel noticed my mood. You've been strange all week. Is this about lunch with Mom? In a way? She won't tell me what happened, just keeps saying she's handling it. I looked at my husband, good, honest Daniel, who believed his mother was a pillar of society. In 1 week, his world would shatter. But better he learn the truth than continue living a lie. After the gala, I said, echoing his mother's words to me. Everything will be clear after the gala. Saturday morning, I met with the audio-visual technician who'd be running the presentation system at the gala. His name was Kyle, and he owed me I'd saved his daughter's life 2 years ago when she came into the ICU after a car accident. I need you to add something to the slideshow, I said, handing him a USB drive. He looked at it nervously. What kind of something? The truth about our host. Can you program it to display at a specific time? During her speech? Right in the middle of it. At exactly 9:15 p.m. He took the drive. You saved Emma's life, whatever you need. I spent the rest of the week perfecting my plan, gathering more evidence, preparing for every contingency. Margaret called twice, but I didn't answer. Daniel mentioned she seemed anxious, distracted, but was throwing herself into gala preparations with manic energy. Of course she was. She thought she had a week to figure out how to handle me. What she didn't know was that I'd already lit the fuse. The explosion was set for 9:15 p.m. next Saturday, in front of Portland's elite, with cameras rolling and reporters watching. Maggie Turner from Southside Chicago was about to make her final public appearance. The week leading to the gala passed in a blur of careful preparation. I returned to work, maintaining normalcy while finalizing every detail of my plan. Daniel noticed my distraction but attributed it to work stress. Margaret called twice more. I let both go to voicemail. On Thursday, Bethany confirmed her editor had approved the story for Saturday's online edition, timed to go live at 9 p.m., 15 minutes before Margaret's speech. The print edition would hit newsstands Sunday morning with a full front-page spread. My fact-checkers have verified everything, she said over coffee. The FBI might even reopen the case based on what we're publishing. Friday night. I stood in our bedroom, watching Daniel adjust his bow tie. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, the one Margaret had insisted he buy from her personal tailor. "You look beautiful," he said, admiring my dress, a simple black gown I'd bought years ago, before Margaret's influence had made me second-guess every choice. "Thank you." I smoothed down the fabric, feeling the weight of what tomorrow would bring. "Daniel, whatever happens tomorrow night, remember that I love you." He frowned. "That's an odd thing to say." "Just remember it." Saturday arrived gray and drizzly, fitting weather for an execution. I spent the morning reviewing everything one last time. The USB drive Kyle had installed contained newspaper clippings, the employee ID photo of Maggie Turner, and Sandra's documents proving the embezzlement. All programmed to display at exactly 9:15 p.m., when Margaret would be midway through her speech about the importance of charitable giving. At 5:30 p.m., I began getting ready. I chose pearl earrings, fake ones, but Margaret didn't need to know that and did my makeup carefully. Tonight, I wanted to look polished. I wanted her to see me in the crowd and feel safe, never suspecting the trap waiting to spring. Daniel knocked on the bathroom door. "Car will be here in 20 minutes. Mom texted that she wants us there early for photos." Of course she does. The grand ballroom at the Sentinel Hotel had been transformed into Margaret's vision of elegant charity crystal chandeliers, white orchids on every table, subtle lighting that made everyone look younger, richer, more generous. A string quartet played in the corner while Portland's elite mingled, champagne flutes in hand. Margaret stood near the entrance in a silver gown that probably cost more than most people's cars, greeting guests with air kisses and practiced smiles. When she saw us, something flickered in her eyes, relief, fear. "Daniel, darling," she said, embracing her son. Then, to me, "Claire, how lovely you look." "Thank you, Margaret." She held my gaze for a moment too long, searching for something. I kept my expression neutral, playing the role of supportive daughter-in-law one last time. "The photographer wants family photos by the auction display," she said. "Shall we?" We posed in front of a backdrop featuring the Children's Hospital logo. Margaret positioned between Daniel and me, her hand gripping my arm just a bit too tightly. The photographer snapped away, capturing what would become infamous images, the last photos of Margaret Hale before her downfall. By 8 p.m., all 500 guests had arrived. The mayor was there, along with 3 congressmen, dozens of CEOs, and enough old money to fund a small country. They'd all come to see and be seen, to write generous checks while Margaret presided over it all. I found Kyle at the AV station, checking his equipment. He gave me a subtle nod. Everything was ready. At 8:45 p.m., everyone was seated for dinner. I watched Margaret at the head table, holding court, regaling her tablemates with some story that had them laughing. She looked invincible up there, surrounded by power and privilege she'd stolen her way into. My phone buzzed at 9 p.m. Exactly. Bethany's text. "It's live." Around the room, I saw people checking their phones as news alerts popped up. A few faces showed confusion, then shock. The mayor's wife leaned over to whisper urgently to her husband, showing him her screen. But Margaret, focused on her triumph, noticed nothing. At 9:10 p.m., the lights dimmed and the event coordinator announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our host and the chair of the Hale Foundation, Mrs. Margaret Hale." Margaret rose to thunderous applause, making her way to the podium with practiced grace. Behind her, a massive screen displayed the foundation's logo. She adjusted the microphone, smiled at the crowd, and began, "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight in support of such a vital cause. As many of you know, I've dedicated my life to charitable work, believing that those of us who have been blessed with abundance have a sacred duty to help those less fortunate." A few people were still looking at their phones, whispering. Margaret's smile faltered slightly, but she pressed on. "Tonight, We have the opportunity to raise $2 million for the Children's Hospital to provide life-saving treatments for families who otherwise couldn't afford them. This cause is particularly close to my heart because at 9:15 p.m. exactly, the screen behind her changed. The foundation logo disappeared, replaced by a newspaper headline, Charity Fraud, 3 Arrested in Brennan Foundation Scandal. Margaret turned, saw the screen, and froze. Her face, captured in perfect detail by the event cameras, went from confusion to recognition to pure terror in the span of 3 seconds. The next slide appeared Maggie Turner's employee ID photo, young and hungry-eyed. Unmistakably Margaret, despite the dark hair. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Margaret's mouth moved, but no sound came out. The microphone picked up her sharp intake of breath, amplified it across the room. Another slide. Primary suspect Margaret Maggie. Turner still at large. Then Sandra's documents, showing the embezzlement scheme in Margaret's own handwriting. Bank records. Forged invoices. $347,000 stolen from families with dying children. Turn it off. Margaret finally found her voice, screaming at Kyle. Turn it off now. But Kyle stood calmly at his station, letting the slides advance. The next one showed Eddie Morrison's mugshot, then his obituary. Died after serving 2 years in federal prison for crimes he didn't commit. The ballroom erupted. People were standing, phones out, either recording or frantically searching for Bethany's article. The mayor was already heading for the exit, his security detail surrounding him. Donors who'd written checks were demanding them back from terrified foundation staff. Margaret stood at the podium, gripping it for support, watching her world collapse in real time. Her silver gown caught the light as she swayed, looking like she might faint. Daniel had risen from his seat, his face a mask of shock and betrayal. "Mom," his voice carried across the chaos. "Mom, what is this?" She looked at him, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "I can explain." "Explain what?" A woman's voice rang out. Mrs. Pemberton, one of Portland's oldest money matriarchs, stood pointing at the screen. "That you're a thief, that you stole from dying children, that you've been lying to all of us for 20 years, added someone else." The screen showed one final image, a recent photo of Sandra Delgado, holding a sign that read, "Margaret Hale destroyed my life. Don't let her destroy yours." Security guards were moving toward the stage now, whether to protect Margaret or escort her out. I couldn't tell. The string quartet had stopped playing. Servers stood frozen with champagne bottles in hand. The entire glittering world Margaret had built was shattering like the crystal she loved so much. Margaret's eyes found mine in the crowd. I was standing near the back, perfectly still, watching her the way she'd watched me suffer through 7 years of her subtle cruelties. She knew in that moment. She knew I'd done this. Her lips formed a single word. Why? I didn't need to answer. She knew why. For every snide comment about my background, for every time she'd made me feel small, for Eddie Morrison and Sandra Delgado and all the families she'd stolen from, for the simple fact that someone needed to stop her. The president of the hospital board had taken the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please, if you could remain calm. We're looking into these allegations. The gala is concluded. Thank you for coming." But people weren't remaining calm. They were fleeing, desperate to distance themselves from the scandal. Tomorrow, they'd all claim they'd always suspected something was off about Margaret Hale. Tonight, they just wanted to escape before the photographers outside could catch them at her tainted event. Margaret stood alone on the stage, abandoned even by her own foundation's staff. The screen behind her had gone dark, but the damage was done. 20 years of careful construction, destroyed in exactly 3 minutes. She walked off the stage slowly, holding her head high in a last attempt at dignity. But I could see her hands shaking, could see the devastation in every step. Daniel intercepted her at the bottom of the stairs. Whatever he said was lost in the chaos. But Margaret's response was clear. She collapsed against him, sobbing. My phone buzzed. Bethany. Story has 50,000 views already. National outlets picking it up. Can you comment? I typed back, no comment needed. The evidence speaks for itself. The ballroom emptied like water from a broken dam. Within minutes, only a handful of people remained shell-shocked foundation staff, confused hotel employees, and us. Daniel stood with his mother near the abandoned head table, his face cycling through emotions I'd never seen before: disbelief, rage, devastation. I walked toward them slowly, my heels clicking against the marble floor, each step echoing in the vast, empty space. Margaret looked up as I approached, mascara streaking down her cheeks in black rivers. "You did this," she said, her voice hoarse. "You planned all of this." "Yes." Daniel turned to me, confusion etched across his features. "Claire, what is she talking about? You knew about this since our lunch at Cascadia, when Tom Garrison recognized her." "A week." Margaret laughed bitterly. "You've been planning this for a week. You asked me to wait until after the gala. I did." Daniel stepped back from both of us, his hands running through his hair. "Someone needs to explain what the hell is happening. Mom, is it true? Were you this Maggie Turner?" Margaret's silence was answer enough. Jesus Christ. Daniel sank into a chair, his bow tie askew. "The FBI called our house when I was 15. Asked about you, about Dad's business. You said it was a mistake, a mix-up with someone else. I protected you," Margaret said. "Everything I did was to protect you." "From what the truth?" His voice cracked. "Dad's money, was any of it real?" "The money became real. The business was legitimate. Your father never knew." "Stop." Daniel held up his hand. "Just stop." The president of the hospital board approached cautiously, his face grave. "Mrs. Hale, I'm afraid we need to discuss the foundation's assets immediately. The donors are demanding—" "I know what they're demanding," Margaret snapped, some of her imperious nature flickering back to life. "They'll get their money back. All $2 million raised tonight." "Yes." "And the previous donations. The past 5 years of galas." Margaret's face went grayer. I'll need to check the accounts." "I'm afraid that won't be possible." A new voice entered the conversation. We all turned to see 2 people in dark suits approaching a man and a woman, both with the unmistakable bearing of federal agents. "Margaret Hale." The woman held up a badge. "I'm Agent Sarah Winters, FBI. This is Agent James Coleman. We need to ask you some questions about your connection to Margaret Turner and the Brennan Foundation fraud." "I want a lawyer," Margaret said immediately. "That's your right, but we're not arresting you. Yet. We're simply investigating claims made in tonight's rather public revelation." Agent Winters smiled thinly. "Though you might want to know that Sandra Delgado has already agreed to cooperate fully with our investigation." Margaret swayed on her feet. Daniel moved to steady her, then stopped, torn between instinct and betrayal. "We'll be in touch," Agent Coleman said, handing Margaret his card. "I'd advise against any travel plans." After they left, the 3 of us stood in the ruins of Margaret's gala. Overturned champagne flutes littered the tables. A banner reading "Building Hope for Tomorrow's Children" hung mockingly above us. "Why?" Daniel asked me, his voice hollow. "Why did you do it this way so publicly?" "Because she needed to feel what she made others feel. Humiliation, destruction, loss. She's my mother. She's also a criminal who destroyed innocent lives." I pulled out my phone, showed him the photo of Eddie Morrison. This man died because of her, drank himself to death after serving prison time for her crimes. Daniel studied the photo, then looked at his mother. "Is this true?" "He was weak," Margaret said quietly. "He would have been caught eventually anyway." "My God," Daniel stepped away from her. "Do you hear yourself? I did what I had to do to survive, to build a life for us, built on what stolen money dead bodies, He was shouting now, his composure finally cracking. Everything you taught me about integrity, about reputation, it was all lies. The lessons were real, even if nothing about you is real. He turned to me. I need to get out of here. Are you coming? I looked at Margaret, this woman who'd tormented me for 7 years, who'd made me feel small and worthless and never good enough. She looked small herself now, diminished, her silver gown wrinkled and stained with tears. Give us a minute, I told Daniel. He hesitated, then nodded, walking toward the exit. I'll be in the car. When we were alone, Margaret and I stood facing each other in the empty ballroom. Somewhere in the hotel, a vacuum started running, life moving on, indifferent to her tragedy. You must be so satisfied, she said. No, I'm not satisfied. I'm just done. What happens now? Now you face consequences. The FBI will investigate. The truth will spread. Everyone will know who you really are. Daniel will never forgive you for this. Maybe not. But he'll never forgive you either. I turned to leave, then stopped. You want to know the ironic thing? If you'd just been kind to me, if you'd accepted me, I might have kept your secret. But you couldn't help yourself. You had to be cruel. It's who I am, she said simply. No, it's who you chose to be. I left her there, standing alone in her ruined kingdom. Outside, photographers had gathered, alerted by social media. They surged forward as I exited, shouting questions, cameras flashing. Mrs. Matthews. Did you know about Margaret Hale's past? How long have you been planning this? What does Daniel say about his mother's crimes? I pushed through them to the car where Daniel waited, slumped in the back seat. He'd loosened his bow tie completely, and his eyes were red. Take us home, he told the driver. We rode in silence through Portland's wet streets. The city looked different somehow, as if Margaret's unmasking had shifted something fundamental in our world. The house, Daniel said suddenly. The house is in her name, the cars, most of our accounts. If the FBI freezes her assets, we'll figure it out. I grew up in that house, every Christmas, every birthday. His voice broke. Was any of it real? Your feelings were real. Your experiences were real. She's still your mother, whatever else she is. How can you be so calm? Because I've had a week to process this. You've had an hour. He reached for my hand, gripped it tightly. I'm sorry. For every time she hurt you and I didn't see it, or didn't want to see it. I know. What happens tomorrow? Tomorrow, the story will be everywhere. Reporters will call. The FBI will investigate. Margaret will hire expensive lawyers. The foundation will dissolve, and we'll start rebuilding our lives without her shadow over us. That simple. No, but that necessary. My phone buzzed constantly, messages from friends, colleagues, numbers I didn't recognize. The story was spreading like wildfire. By morning, Margaret Hale would be the most infamous woman in Portland. We pulled up to our apartment at 11:45 p.m. Daniel looked up at our building, modest compared to his mother's mansion. But ours, honest and real. She was right about one thing, he said as we walked inside. What's that? I'll never forgive you for doing it this way. He paused at our door. But I'll never forgive her for making it necessary. Inside our apartment, I kicked off my heels and poured 2 glasses of wine. Daniel stood at the window, looking out at the city lights. Do you think she'll go to prison? I don't know. It's been 22 years. But identity fraud, money laundering, those are serious charges. The scandal will destroy everything she built, everything she stole. He turned to me. What about us? Can we survive this? I thought about the question honestly. Our marriage had been built in Margaret's shadow, constantly strained by her manipulations. Now that shadow was gone, burned away in the harsh light of truth. I don't know, I said. But for the first time, we have a chance to find out. My phone rang. Bethany calling. I let it go to voicemail. Tomorrow would bring interviews, investigations, and recriminations. But tonight, in our small apartment, Daniel and I sat together in silence, processing the earthquake that had just shattered our world. Outside, Portland slept, unaware that by morning, the city's most prominent socialite would be its most notorious pariah. The Hale Foundation Gala would be remembered not for the money it raised, but for the spectacular fall of its host. And somewhere across the city, Margaret Hale sat alone in her mansion, surrounded by the spoils of her stolen life, waiting for the dawn that would bring the final destruction of everything she'd built on the ruins of others. The revenge was complete. But the reckoning had just begun. 3 months later, I stood in the doorway of Margaret's former mansion, now stripped bare by federal agents and creditors. The Persian rugs were gone, the artwork removed, the crystal chandeliers sold at auction. Sunlight streamed through empty windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in spaces that once hosted Portland's elite. Daniel was with the lawyers, signing the final paperwork to dissolve any remaining ties to his mother's estate. Everything had been seized or sold to pay restitution. The FBI had built their case methodically: identity fraud, money laundering, tax evasion. Margaret had pled guilty to avoid a trial that would have lasted years. She got 8 years in federal prison, with possibility of parole in 5. The judge had been lenient, considering her age and the time that had passed. But for someone like Margaret, who lived for society and status, prison was a fate worse than death. I walked through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing. In what had been her study, I found a single photo left behind Margaret and Daniel at his law school graduation, both smiling, both believing in the lie they were living. Found you. I turned to see Sandra Delgado in the doorway. She'd come to Portland to testify before the grand jury and stayed to watch Margaret's sentencing. "How does it feel?" she asked, looking around the empty mansion. "Hollow," I admitted. "I thought I'd feel victorious, but mostly I just feel tired." "That's because you're a good person. You did this for justice, not pleasure." Sandra picked up the photo I'd been looking at. Her son. "My husband. How's he handling it?" "Day by day. He's in therapy. We both are. Still together, though." "Still together. Turns out when you remove a toxic influence, relationships can heal." Sandra smiled sadly. "My marriage didn't survive my conviction. My kids barely speak to me." 20 years of collateral damage. The foundation set up a restitution fund. You should apply. I did. Got approved for $200,000. She laughed bitterly. Doesn't give me back 2 decades, but it's something. We stood in comfortable silence, 2 women bonded by Margaret's destruction. Outside, a moving truck pulled up. The new owners were already taking possession. "I saw her," Sandra said suddenly. "At the sentencing, in her orange jumpsuit, no makeup, her hair going gray at the roots. She looked ordinary, small. That's all she ever was, an ordinary woman who wanted to be extraordinary and didn't care who she hurt to get there. You know what the strangest part is? She was actually good at running charities. The Hale Foundation did real good before this scandal. If she'd just stayed Maggie Turner, worked honestly, she could have had a decent life. But decent wasn't enough for her." "No," Sandra agreed. "It never is for people like her." "Shh!" Daniel appeared in the doorway, looking exhausted. "It's done. The estate is officially dissolved." Sandra excused herself, pressing my hand before she left. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing the truth mattered." Daniel and I stood alone in his childhood home, now just an empty house. "Any regrets?" he asked. "About exposing her?" "No." "About how you did it?" I thought about that night at the gala, the public humiliation, the calculated destruction. Sometimes. But then I remember Eddie Morrison, Sandra, all the families who needed that money she stole. "She's my mother," Daniel said quietly. "And I hate her. Is that wrong?" "No, it's honest." We walked out together, leaving the mansion for the last time. The new owners could make fresh memories there, untainted by Margaret's lies. 2 weeks ago, I'd received a letter from federal prison. Margaret's handwriting, still perfectly precise despite everything. Claire, you won. I hope that brings you peace. I won't apologize. We both know I'm not capable of genuine remorse. But I will say this, you were the only one who saw me clearly. The real me, not the performance. In a strange way. I respect you for that. Take care of Daniel. He's the only good thing I ever created, even if I built him on a foundation of lies. I'd shown it to Daniel. He read it twice, then burned it in our fireplace, watching his mother's last words turn to ash. Now, standing outside the mansion, he took my hand. The reporters stopped calling. He said, "Finally. My firm says I can come back whenever I'm ready." "Are you ready?" "Almost. I need to do something first." He pulled out an envelope. "Tom Garrison gave me this. It's Eddie Morrison's sister's address. I want to apologize. Tell her about the restitution fund. She might not want to hear from you. I know, but I have to try." That was Daniel now facing the truth, no matter how painful. Margaret's lies had nearly destroyed him, but they hadn't broken him. We drove home through Portland's afternoon traffic. The city had moved on to new scandals, new gossip. Margaret Hale was yesterday's news, a cautionary tale told at dinner parties about the danger of secrets and the price of ambition. But for those of us caught in her web, the effects lingered. Daniel still woke sometimes at 3 a.m., going through memories, trying to separate truth from fiction. I still felt a twist of anger when we passed Cascadia, remembering that lunch where everything unraveled. Yet we were healing, slowly, carefully, like bones knitting back together after a break. "I've been thinking," Daniel said as we pulled up to our apartment, "about what you said that night, that sometimes the stranger at the next table isn't a coincidence, it's the past arriving right on schedule." "Yeah, you were right. The past always comes to collect its debts. Margaret ran for 22 years, but it still found her. Through Tom Garrison. Pure chance he was at that restaurant." "Was it, though?" Daniel smiled slightly. "Or was it inevitable you can change your name, your hair, your entire life, but you can't change who you are inside, and who she was inside was always going to destroy who she pretended to be." We climbed the stairs to our apartment, our real home, bought with honest money, filled with genuine memories. Inside, life waited simple, authentic. Ours. I thought about Margaret in her federal cell, stripped of everything that mattered to her. She'd built an empire on stolen ground and watched it collapse in minutes. The woman who'd tormented me with my inadequacies had been the most inadequate of all, a fraud, a thief, a ghost wearing designer clothes. "Do you think she thinks about them?" Daniel asked. "Eddie Morrison, Sandra, the families she stole from, no," I said honestly. "I think she only thinks about what she lost." "Then she learned nothing." "People like Margaret never do. That's their tragedy." Daniel poured us wine, not the expensive vintages his mother preferred, just a decent bottle from the corner store. We sat on our second-hand couch, in our modest apartment, surrounded by our ordinary life. "I love you," he said suddenly, "for seeing the truth, for having the courage to expose it, for staying with me through this. I love you too, for surviving this, for choosing truth over comfort, for becoming your own person, finally." Outside, Portland went about its business, unaware of our small moment of peace. The city's towers gleamed in the setting sun, hiding 1,000 secrets behind their windows. But our secret was out, exposed, dealt with. Margaret Hale was gone. Maggie Turner was in prison, and we were free. I thought about Tom Garrison, probably back home now, playing with his grandchild, never knowing he'd been the catalyst for Margaret's destruction. About Sandra, rebuilding her life with her restitution money. About Eddie Morrison's sister, who'd finally see some justice for her brother's death. The stranger at the next table had indeed been the ghost of the past, arriving exactly when the universe decided it was time. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's exactly what needs to happen for the truth to finally win. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story of secrets and revenge resonated with you, please consider subscribing to the channel and sharing your thoughts. What would you have done in Claire's position? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to share this story with someone who loves a tale of justice served cold.